We read in this week's portion, Veschanan. These are the last 36 days of Moshe's life. And he's giving Musar. He's giving words of rebuke, words of encouragement to the Jewish people before he passes away. And Moshe, being who he was, being the most dedicated leader, the most spiritual person, doing things which nobody in the history of existence had brought about on behalf of the Jewish people, whether it was the 10 plagues, whether it was the splitting of the sea, whether it's the destruction of the Egyptian armies, whether it's the bitter oasis, which was sweetened, whether it was the manna, whether it was the clouds of glory and splitting of the rock, and plus the giving of Torah at Sinai, supplicating God when they sinned with the golden calf, having them fully reinstated. And now it's the 40th year after the conquest of the two giants, the territory of the two giants. See, divided, the conquest has started. We find that Noach was given the most important task that existed from creation till his moment. The Mishnah tells us, Pirkei Avos, the 10 generations from Noach, from Adam to Noach. What happened? Humanity failed very badly, and God communicates with Noach, and he says to him, I want you to build an ark, and it's a 120-year project. It should be the focal point of humanity, that people should come and enter into a dialogue with you. Because I give them 120 years to better their ways. If not, I'll put that last nail in their coffin, the world will be destroyed. Noach begins the project and engages with the members of those generations, and he fails, does not succeed. God says to Noach, I will destroy the world. All humanity except you and your family will survive, and a representation of every species will be in that ark. He failed. And God says to Noah, go into the ark, and that's the end of the story. The past no longer existed. A year later, he comes out of the ark, him and his children. The past humanity no longer exists. It's a new world. So the commentators ask a question. When God said, the story is over, the world will be destroyed, why didn't Noach supplicate Hashem and pray on behalf of his generation? As when Moshe heard after the golden calf that the Jewish people were going to be destroyed, he prayed immediately. God says, I will destroy them. And through his supplication, he activated the attribute of mercy. And we reinstated, we were not destroyed. Why didn't Noach pray? That's the question which is asked. And people find fault with him. He should have prayed, he didn't. So Rabbeinu Bachya, which is an early commentator, explains, God forbid. If God says to Noach, it's over, the verdict's in, not to be reversed, where would Noach have the audacity or the brazenness to try to undo something which God says the fate is sealed? He was not permitted to pray. God being the creator, God having the final word, once he gave his verdict, the final word, there's nothing to talk about any longer. That's why Noach did not pray. Why did Moshe pray? Although God says, I will destroy them. So the Talmud tells us that when God says to Moshe, I will destroy them, he says to Moshe, allow me to destroy them. So Moshe had a question immediately. What do you mean, allow me to destroy them? You're God. Everything's in your hands. You want to destroy them, destroy them. What are you saying? Indicating that I have something to say in the matter. By saying, allow me. So that was the opening. Moshe understood that it's all dependent on my intervention. That if I intercede at this moment, there's a chance I could reactivate the attribute of mercy and the Jewish people could be reinstated. But if God didn't allude at any level that the verdict could be overturned, Moshe wouldn't have opened his mouth and they would have been destroyed. It's only because God said to Moshe, allow me. That was the eye-opener to Moshe to begin praying. Now, we find that the most evil community that existed on the face of the earth was Sodom and Amorah. And God brought cosmic destruction on them. They were obliterated from the face of the earth. There's no trace or remnant of their previous existence. That's how evil they were. Hashem comes to Avram and says, I will destroy Sodom and Amorah. What does Avram do? The moment he hears it, he enters into a dialogue with Hashem. How could you destroy them? Maybe they're 50 tzaddikim. Maybe they're 45 tzaddikim. In the merit of the 50 or 45 or 40, 30, whatever the numbers he came across with, they should be spared. At the end of the discussion, God says there's not even one tzaddik. It's over. I will close them forever. They will be obliterated from the face of the earth. And that's what happened. Question is, but if God says to Avram, I will destroy them, where does Avram have the right to attempt to intercede on their behalf? And in the merit of so many tzaddikim, they should be spared. The understanding is, Avram had a question. God comes and shares this with him. I will destroy Sodom and Amorah because they're evil. God, you want to destroy him? What do you come and tell me the story? You're God, destroy them. So Avram, when he was told they're going to be destroyed, although he had no relevance to them, evidently for him, that was the indicator that he may have something to say about it. That maybe his intervention, his interceding, may stay the execution. Maybe, you never know. So that was the reason why Avram began supplicating and entered into this dialogue with God. Maybe they should be spared because to be a chil Hashem otherwise. But if God would have never come to Avram and he would have heard God's destroying them, he wouldn't have said a word. It's only because he came to share it with Avram, and Avram has no relevance to this. So why are you sharing it to me? Evidently, it's an indication I may have something to say. At the end of the day, he had nothing to say because they had no merit, because there weren't any tzaddikim, no devoutly righteous people, and therefore they'd have a trace of merit, therefore they were destroyed. God says to Moshe, of course, you struck the rock and you had the ability to sanctify my name, and you did not, you will never enter into the promised land. Moshe Rabbeinu, now in the 40th year, he begins supplicating God. 550 prayers. That's Chanan El Hashem. I sought out God's graciousness. And he said to me, I don't want to hear from you. It's a closed chapter. Don't continue praying. Now the question is, if God sealed the fate of Moshe by saying, because he struck the rock, you will die, what's even the consideration, Moshe? How did Moshe have the audacity to even attempt to overturn the verdict? It's a closed deal. His fate is sealed. Moshe also had an indication. On the Transjordan side, we read about the Jews are going through the territory of the two giants. Sichon Melech Amori, Sichon, the king of Amori, was a giant, and Og, the king of Bashan, who were giants. And he destroys these two giants, and they have tremendous territory on the Transjordan side. And there were two tribes, Reuven and Gad, who had tremendous flocks and herds, and they needed grazing lands. And they come to Moshe and they say, we would like that this territory should be given to us as our share of the conquest. We don't want a piece of Israel proper. We want this. Moshe Rabbeinu immediately is concerned that maybe they were trying to put a damper on the whole story, similar to the spies. By them not wanting to go across the Jordan to be partake of the conquest, it will discourage Jews from entering into the promised land. So there's a whole long discussion back and forth. No, we will go across, we will conquer the land with our brothers and divide the land, and then we will return. But we want the Transjordan territory because we need all these grazing lands. Okay? God said to Moshe, you will not be part of the conquest. That's what he said. Factually, God allowed him to conquer the Transjordan side, the territory of the giants. And it was given to two tribes. So Moshe took that as an indication that maybe God is agreeable to annul the decree. So there is a place for the attribute of mercy. And you have to pray for it. You have to activate it. That's the reason why Moshe prayed. But if he would have had no indicator whatsoever that God let up or allowed even as much as an iota of that original decree, Moshe wouldn't have opened his mouth, wouldn't have said a word. It's only because he saw that he was part of the conquest. He thought maybe there's an indication that maybe God will allow the attribute of mercy to overturn the verdict to allow him to go into the land. That's how I understood it. That's why he prayed. Noach, God says, this fate is sealed, the world will be destroyed. Noach did not say a word. He had no right to pray. Praying would have been a disrespect because God has the final word. I always ask a question. We find that Moshe, when it came to the existence of the Jewish people, whether they should be annihilated or not annihilated, should they go forth or not go forth, Moshe left no stone unturned. He did whatever he could for the sake of the Jewish people. Why? There was no Jew as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. There was no prophet who was great as Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is the father of all prophets, greater than those all who preceded him, those who follow him. Moshe Rabbeinu, God attests personally, is the most humble human being who ever walked the face of the earth. He was totally negated to God. Now, we read the first few words of the Torah. The words are, Bereshis Bore Elokim. Literally means in the beginning God created. But Chazal tell us the word Bereshis, it means for the sake of Bereshis, God created this existence. For the sake of the chosen, for the sake of what's choicest, God created this existence. What's the chosen and what's the choicest? For the sake of Torah, God created this existence. The location of challenge for all aspects of the Torah is the physical existence. The only nation that has the capacity, who could be challenged and succeed, are only the Jewish people, who are the chosen. So in the first three words of the Torah already gives us the whole thrust, the whole projection of the objective of creation, for the sake of Torah, for the sake of the Jewish people. And the Navi says, why did God create this world? The prophet says, L'chvodi borosiv. I've created this world for my glory. What does that mean for my glory? God needs no glory. That if you recognize my glory through the observance of the Torah, then you merit to have a relationship with me. So what's the objective of creation? God's glory. The only nation has relevance and the capacity to recognize that are only the Jewish people. And what is the means through which we recognize? Through which lens do we recognize God's glory? The lens is called the Torah. That's the lens. Ner mitzvah Torah or. What's the illuminator? What sheds light? What gives us understanding? What allows us to internalize these values and these beliefs? The study of Torah that spiritualizes us. The fulfillment of the mitzvos touches us. It creates a spiritual energy which takes us from physical beings and activates all our spiritual nerve endings, which allow us to have an appreciation for something which is outside of the realm of our physicality. That's what it's about. So why did Moshe love the Jewish people? Because there was no human being who ever loved God as Moshe did. He was fully negated. And if God's glory can only come through the Jewish people and through the Torah, Moshe will not allow a stone unturned for the sake of the Jewish people. Because the key and the path to God's glory is only the Jewish people. So when God says, I will destroy them, I will annihilate them, I will clip their wings, Moshe is not taking this sitting down. So Moshe said, what you're saying is that your glory is going to be snuffed out. The objective of creation is not going to be met. He will not allow it. He will do anything within his capacity to bring about that end result. We find at the time of the golden calf, God says, I will destroy them. That's how intense the attribute of justice was. Moshe Rabbeinu says, if you destroy them, I want my name to be obliterated from the Chumash, from the Torah. I don't want my name to be mentioned. What does that mean? And by not mentioning, well, you're threatening God. So your name won't be mentioned. So the Sephardo in his commentary explains it this way, beautiful. Rambam writes in the Laws of Tshuva, how do you evaluate, classify a person who's a tzaddik or a person who's not a tzaddik? A tzaddik is a person that the majorities of his accomplishments, based on a qualitative evaluation, which only can be made by God, is the majority of his accomplishment. So if the majority of accomplishment is positive, classification is tzaddik. If God forbid, if the majority of the accomplishment is negative, the classification is Rasha. You know what Moshe Rabbeinu says? What is my value? My value is my accomplishment. The choices I've made. Take all my accomplishment, spiritual accomplishment, take it away from me, put it on the scale on behalf of the Jewish people. And since Moshe is the equivalent of Jewish people, that will bring about the balance, that the balance is towards the right. Therefore, they will be seen as Sadiqim, because my merits I'm transferring into their account. Once Moshe transfers his merits to the Jewish people, he becomes a non-entity. Because Moshe is only Moshe because of his level of value, which are his accomplishments. That's what he says, Mecheni no misipto. Obliterate me from your book. How do you give it all away? Moshe Rabbeinu, closest man to God, put the Jewish people. You know what the answer is? Moshe only understood one thing, God's glory. And whatever it takes to guarantee that glory, Moshe gives it all away. Even though his name will not be mentioned, because he's been devalued to nothing, because whatever his accomplishments were, he gave it away to the Jewish people. This was Moshe Rabbeinu. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu want to go into Israel? Israel proper. Why? Because who was Moshe's successor? Yoshua ben Nun, Joshua. Whatever you say about Joshua, and he was qualified to be his successor, Yoshua was not Moshe. Was not Moshe. As it says, The face of Moshe is compared to the light of the sun. Yoshua is compared to the light of the moon. The moon is only a reflection of the sun. Moshe Rabbeinu is the source. So you cannot compare the leadership of one to the other. Moshe didn't want to die, not because he wanted to live. Again, it's for the sake of God's glory. Because the level of leadership that he's able to provide, nobody can provide that leadership. He took them from the embryonic state all the way to adulthood, to receive the Torah, to become the ultimate, through thick and thin. Now he's able to bring him to that ultimate level. He wants to do that because Yeshua can't bring about what he could bring about. God says, you're not crossing that Jordan. But why? What's the reason? God didn't disagree. Moshe could bring him to a level, nobody could bring him to that level. There's another question. If God wanted Moshe to go into the promised land, why did Moshe strike the rock? Because the Jews spoke disrespectfully to him. And he said to them, Shimu no Amorim, listen, you rebellious people. And because he became angry, therefore he lost the clarity for a moment and he struck the rock. So God says, you could have spoken to the rock. Why did you strike the rock? You would have brought about a sanctification of God's name by speaking to the rock. But why did God give him that challenge, which God knew he would fail? And the result would be he can't go into the land. If God wanted him to go into the land, he shouldn't have brought about that challenge. And as a result of that, he wouldn't have failed. Why? Right? Basic question. The answer is, we find after the sin of the golden calf, we were told to build a Mishkan. The Mishkan itself, God says, build for me a Mishkan, and that will be the medium through which I will dwell in your midst. Before the sin of golden calf, God would have dwelt directly in our midst. But because we were tainted with idolatry, now we need the medium called the Mishkan, that through the Mishkan, God dwells in our midst. It's the arm's length relationship. That's what it is. Now, in Hebrew, the word mashkon means collateral. Collateral. Person's a debtor, he gives collateral, and the lender takes collateral for the debt. When God says to Moshe, build the Mishkan, then it says Mishkan, Mishkan Eidos. The word Mishkan is mentioned twice in that one verse. So Chazal tell us God took collateral twice from us. The first temple was destroyed, which was collateral, and the second temple was destroyed. That was the second time he took collateral. What would have been the alternative? The alternative would have been, and it's based on a verse in Tehillim, that God says, I really should have extended my wrath on you, the Jewish people, and you would have been destroyed. But rather, I expended it on wooden stones by destroying the first and second temple, therefore you were not destroyed. I took collateral instead of taking you as collection of the debt. So the Beis HaMikdash, the first and second temple being destroyed, that was the ultimate expression of mercy. Of course, the alternative would have been, they would have to be destroyed, the Jewish people. God forbid. Now, the Talmud tells us, Moshe Rabbeinu being who he was, anything that he participated in takes on eternal value. It can never be destroyed. If Moshe Rabbeinu would have gone into the promised land and built the temple, built the Beis HaMikdash, that Beis HaMikdash could have never been destroyed. And if it couldn't been destroyed and Jews failed, what has to be the decision? You have to destroy the Jewish people. Because we don't have the collateral of the temple to take in their place as collection of the debt. Therefore, God says, Moshe, you're not going in. Because if you go in, you're going to build the temple. And since the Jews are destined to fail, they have to be punished. And if I don't have the collateral to take, they have to be killed. because my wrath will come upon them. At this moment of time of supplication, Moshe didn't understand that. He thought that he's able to nurse him back to full health to prevent them from sinning. But as we say, God knows better. And because God knew it's not going to happen, and Moshe is not going to be able to achieve that level of correction, therefore God says, you're not crossing that Jordan. You're not going into the land. Because if you go eternally, it will be a total detriment to my glory. And if they have to live for my glory, they're going to live. Once Moshe understood that, once he understood it, he remained silent. Because Moshe only lived for God's glory. And if God's glory only comes to the Jewish people, and if he should build a temple, there won't be a Jewish people because there's no collateral to take, Moshe remained silent. And Moshe is okay with this. Now, but Moshe asked something else. I understand why you don't want me to cross the Jordan, for that reason, as we just explained. But at least allow me to be buried in the promised land. God says, even your remains will not cross the Jordan. Now, where was Moshe buried? He was buried on Har Nevo. That was the name of the mountain. Where was Har Nevo located? The Torah identifies where it was located. Now, in the 40th year, Bilam, the prophet of the nations, attempted to curse the Jewish people. Balak had commissioned him. He failed. God would not allow him. But after he failed and he left, he says to Balak, the king of Moab, he says, one thing I could tell you, the God of the Jews will not tolerate licentiousness, will not tolerate promiscuity. You get the Moabite women and the Midianite princes to make their bodies available to Jewish men, together with the idolatry of Baal Peor, done deal, God will destroy them. The wrath of God will be activated at a level that the attribute of justice will not be able to be quelled. And what happened? It almost happened. We read about the Baal Peor. We read about Zimri, the prince of the tribe of Shimon, how he publicly cohabits with Cosbi, Basur, the Midianite princess. And what happens? A plague ensues. 24,000 Jews die in a plague. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Pinchas, the grandson of Aaron, he immediately takes a spear as a zealot, and he kills Zimri and this woman. And he pierces them in the location of the genitals. And when he did that, the plague ceased. Because God says, because Pinchas was zealous, and he expressed my zealousness. And he saved the day. He saved the Jewish people. And then there was more Midianites. God says, you must annihilate Midian. Because if not for Pinchas's intervention then, you would have been destroyed. You cannot leave a remnant of the Midianite people. And they were totally annihilated. That was God's command. Avenge the vengeance of the Jewish people from the Midianite people. But you realize, even though the plague ceased, but this is the new generation. This generation were the children of the generation of Sinai. They were meant to go into the land. How do you fail with the Baal Peor? How do you fail with the women? Even though the ones who were involved, they all died in the plague. But still, you were there exposed to this. You tolerated it. The Baal Peor, where it took place, once a year, rears its head and brings about a level of prosecution, which that prosecution can be silenced against the Jewish people. This is on the record from the past. You know where Moshe is buried? Opposite Baal Peor. When that negative power rears its head to bring prosecution on the Jewish people, it sees Moshe's grave. When it sees Moshe's location where his burial place is, immediately it sinks back into the ground and it's silenced. And every year, once a year, it rears its head and Moshe's presence quiets it and quells it, there should not be a prosecution. But if that prosecution would be allowed to go unrestrained, the Jewish people would be destroyed. It would activate a level of attribute of justice, which is uncontainable. So why could Moshe's remains not go across the Jordan? He living can't go across the Jordan because we say the collateral was the first and second temple. If Moshe would have built it, the Jews would have been destroyed. Now we have a new problem. We have a skeleton in our closet every year. It gets reactivated, which is called Baal Peor. Who's going to contend with that? So if Moshe's remains would have been buried in Israel, rather than on the Transjordan side, which is opposite the Baal Peor, how could have that prosecution be silenced? It would have been impossible. As a result of that, Moshe did not make it across the Jordan. God would not allow. So again, when Moshe heard that, not a problem. I live for God's glory. I die for God's glory. And if God's glory is the Jewish people, and be buried on the Transjordan side, will only allow the Jewish people to continue to exist, which is the objective of creation, then I die on the Transjordan side. I die happily there. I'm buried happily there. Why? Because that is the basis where I'm able to bring about God's glory, because God's glory is only the Jewish people. That's what it's about. So what was Moshe's love rooted in for the Jewish people? It was rooted in God, love for God. That's what it was. So let's talk about something now. There's a positive commandment. You must love your fellow Jews as you love yourself. So the question is why? Why must you love your fellow Jews as you love yourself? So we mentioned in the past from our Moshe Cordovero in his work, the Palm of Dvorah, that all Jewish souls are part of the same network of souls. Each Jew is another component in the network known as the Jewish people. When a Jew does a positive action, what we call a mitzvah, he infuses positive energy into the whole system. So every Jew is a beneficiary of that Jew's action. For instance, we speak about there are 248 positive commandments, 365 negative commandments. Does every commandment have relevance to every Jew? The answer is no. If a person is a Kohen, only a Kohen is permitted to officiate in the temple. If you're not a Kohen, you're not permitted. A Kohen is not permitted to contaminate himself with the dead. A non-Kohen is. So there are many mitzvos which have relevance to the Kohen, which have no relevance to the ordinary Jew. And there's certain mitzvahs that have relevance to the ordinary Jew, which have no relevance to the Kohen. So if that's the case, how do we put it all together? How does every Jew have relevance to 248 positive commandments and 365 negative commandments? The answer is very simple. Because every soul is connected to every other soul. So the totality of Jewish people, we're an entity of spirituality. And whatever we do, we contribute to the sum total known as the Jewish people. And if God forbid, if a person transgresses and sins, you're bringing a virus into the system. You diminish the system. You're taking down the system. The system begins malfunctioning. Therefore, a Jew has an obligation. If you see your fellow brother doing the wrong thing, you have an obligation to inform him that he's doing the wrong thing. Not only for him, because when he fails, you're affected by this. The Midrash explains with an allegory. Two people are sitting in a boat, and one of them begins boring a hole under a seat. Yeah. Says, fellow passenger says to me, he says, what are you doing? He says, do you realize what you're doing? He says, what are you talking about? It's under my seat, it's not under your seat. Says, fellow passenger says, yeah, but if you put that hole in the floor of that boat, we both go down. That is the concept of Avtodecha Kamocha. The Jews being one entity of spirituality, any positive infusion, we're all beneficiaries. Any negative introduction of negative energy, we're all victims of that negative energy. It creates a malfunction in the system. That's the simple understanding. As So when I love my fellow, I'm really doing for myself because he's part of me and I'm part of him. That's the concept. And that's why there's no such thing as mind your own business. Because when I inform my fellow that he's doing the wrong thing, I am a victim of his misbehavior. Because he and me were connected to one another. Therefore, you have an obligation to try to attempt to set him straight that he should not cross those lines that he's attempting to cross. But according to what we're saying now, that's true, but it's even more than that. There's a mitzvah to love God. If you truly love God, and every Jew in his own right is the equivalent of all existence. And that's why the Talmud tells us, if you save one Jewish life, it's the equivalent of saving the whole world. So what is the value of the Jewish life in terms of bringing about God's glory? It's unfathomable. So therefore, love your fellow Jew. If you love God, love your fellow Jew. Because only God's glory comes through your fellow Jew. It can't come through anybody else, only your fellow Jew. That's why there's a mitzvah of after recha kamocha. Love your fellow as you love yourself. Do whatever you can to assist him, to support him. And he should not fall victim, because if he falls victim, you have one less soldier in the field to bring glory to God's name for that reason. That's the understanding. It's interesting. If you ever met what we call true Torah leaders, true Torah sages, the love they had for Jews is not to be imagined. Why? But he's a secular Jew. He's not an observant Jew. Doesn't make a difference. He still has a Jewish soul. He's still my brother. Brother even more than flesh and blood. We're soul brothers. Our souls are connected. Rav Aaron Kotler, Zechat Tzaddik Livrocha, blessed memory, during the war, he came to the United States in 1941. He came from Kobe, Japan. And he created something known as the Vad Hatzolah. It was an organization to save Jews from the inferno of the Nazis. Jews going to their death in the crematoriums, in the gas chambers. And Rav Aaron Kotler, who was the leading Torah sage at that time, worked ceaselessly, 24 hours a day, to raise money, to advocate the government, to save as many Jews as he could. Superhuman initiatives he took on. He had people traveling, going around on Shabbos in cars, from shul to shul, raising money, because every moment that was delayed, could have been thousands of lives, because the Nazis were willing to negotiate lives for trucks. And there were all kinds of stories with Roosevelt being a rabid anti-Semite, and Morgenthau, who was the Secretary of Treasury, how Rav Aaron Kotler had a meeting with him, and he said to him, through Irving Bunim, who was a wealthy textile merchant, who was Rav Aaron Kotler's right-hand person, and they had a meeting with Morgenthau, and he said to Morgenthau, you're an assimilated Jew. You have no relevance to the world to come. God gives you an opportunity now. If you do for the Jewish people, by allowing transfer of American currency to Switzerland, to be able to negotiate with the Nazis, you guaranteed a share in the world to come. And if not, if you shirk your responsibility as a Jew, you're going into the oblivion. This is what he says to Morgenthau. And he said it in Yiddish. Irving Bunim translated into English. But when Rav Aaron Kotler spoke, he spoke like a flamethrower. That was his intensity of his personality. Irving Bunim was college educated, a wealthy man. He knew exactly how to play the political game. He spoke with a respectfulness, with a refinement, not between the eyes. See, even though Rav Aaron Kotler did not speak English or understand English, but he understood that Irving Bunim did not give it over the way he wanted to be given over. See, he says to Irving Bunim, his last name was Bunim, He says, Bunim. You didn't say it the way I said it. I want you to give it over to Morgenthau as I said it to you. Okay? Bunim spoke a very good English, and he was a genius of a man. He spoke with such force and conviction to Morgenthau. Nobody ever spoke to Morgenthau in this manner. Morgenthau was shocked, and you know what Morgenthau said? I will do what the rabbi wants. It was 3:00 in the morning. He picked up the phone and he called the Secretary of State. His name was Holmes, Holmes, who himself was an anti-Semite. Could you imagine? He wakes him up in the middle of the night. Holmes uses a few deletives, few choice profane words on Morgenthau. He's an assimilated Jew, but a Jew's a Jew, no matter what stripes, what color stripes you wear. And he says to him, I want you to call Roosevelt. And we need the green light to be able to transfer funds to Switzerland to deal with the Nazis. Because the tens of thousands of Jews being burnt and being incinerated and going to the gas chambers. Holmes agreed. He woke up Roosevelt. You can imagine what Roosevelt said. You know, you can't even repeat the words that Roosevelt said. You know, for these whatever Jews. And whatever it was, he was able to accomplish what Rabbi Cutler wanted. And they agreed to transfer whatever the amount of money was transferred. The amount of money they raised, they received permission from the State Department to transfer the money to Europe to be able to negotiate with the Nazis to save lives for trucks, because the Nazis were losing the war at that time. The man's a Rosh Hashiva. He's a proficient in the Talmud. The man can't do a Wall Street deal. So where are all these Wall Street? Millions of Jews are being murdered. Where are you people? Rabbi Cutler, this little tiny holy Jew, he's concerned about the millions of Jews that are being incinerated. Why? The answer is because for him, God's glory is why he lives. These other guys, it's the country club. It's Belmont Raceway. That they had a Jewish name, they changed to Belmont, and who knows what else. That's not their priority. It's not even kosher style in their country clubs. It's lobster and crabs and everything else they have there. That's how far gone these people went. But your brothers are being murdered. How do you not say a word? You know, life goes on. We don't need these European Jews here. We need these burdens. That's the way they saw it. But Rabbi Cutler, what does he live? What's the value of his life? Only God's glory. Whatever will bring about God's glory, even one extra Jew to survive. You can't fathom his value. Saving him is like saving the world. So I will turn over the world to save the life of one Jew. And that was Rabbi Cutler. And that's the Torah perspective. Every Jew is God's glory. Therefore, you violate the Torah to save the life of a Jew. Because nothing is as valuable as a Jew's life, because only through the Jew could God's glory be achieved.